So the question before us is, what is life? And some answers have been given. And of course, the obvious thing is, well, life is this proximate thing that we're experiencing because when we ask the question, it means that we're alive. But it doesn't explain anything. It doesn't tell us or give us a definition of what is life. So although it seems to be a self-obvious thing, and we have many examples of living things, what life is itself is an age-old question. And so the great physicist Erwin Schrödinger in 1942 gave a series of lectures in Dublin itself to an institute, and the Institute of Advanced Studies, I think it was. I was just trying to look for see where that was. But he gives a series of lectures and publishes that as a book, What is Life? So you would think that a deep thinker, a prominent physicist, somebody who contributed so much to our physics today, our fundamental physics, and contributed toward this wonderful Schrödinger equation named after him, the wave function as a calculation, would have the answer ready at his fingertips, but he has to give a whole series of thoughtful essays on it or talks on it. And we can look at it from a number of different points of view. And he very humbly is saying, I'm not sure if I'm qualified, but I'll have a go at it. I think I'm right to tell you what I think life is. So the interesting question is, we know that the body, for example, and all the forms that we encounter in so-called life are all combinations, chemical combinations. We can put them down to molecules. Very difficult to see molecules. We can see them with an electron microscope, but we cannot see atoms with that same mechanism. And we certainly cannot see detailed things. We can maybe work out some aspects of a cell, but really, what makes a cell pulse? Let's take a small cell like a bacteria, let us say almost, a rod-shaped bacteria, which is like half a micron in width, and then 1 micron in length. A micron is 1,000th of a millimeter. That is composed of millions and billions and billions of atoms. And he brings up an interesting question. He says, is it the incredible thing that things are so incredibly infinitely small, or that we are so big? And when we look out now at the universe with apparatus that wasn't around in 1942, then we can see how far the universe stretches. And even so, we can declare that in your body and mine, there are more atoms than astronomical bodies, stars, and so on in the entire universe. And not only that, but if we bring it down to a cell, bacteria, the number of bacteria in your body far outweighs the cells of your body. Most of them are cooperative and on your side. So he notes there must be some laws going on. And then if we say, what is life? We have to examine, what are these laws and why should they be there? Now, the obvious conclusion might be, well, some harmonizing agent is there, establishing these laws. And there's another school of thought that says these laws might be evolving laws. Maybe something started and then by experience and experimentation, a learning curve, we develop all these laws. After all, what are laws? They're just observed regularities. And some of them are mathematical laws and all the rest of it. But why should they be there? And can we reduce them and simplify them? Or should we just infinitely multiply them? But it really doesn't answer the question, what is life? We experience it. We experience a pulse. And we know the contrast of it, which is death. But even death is part of a cyclical arrangement, because a decaying body, organic cells which decay, really are picked up and used as a resource to sustain life for other organisms. And so that's why the body decays apart from anything else. And then we are reliant on external things. If we say purely on the physical level that life is inherently with us, and we won't bother to think where is it coming from. But if we look at it properly from purely a physical point of view, we're all running on canned sunshine. And not only that, but it's all what is responsible for this life is the chloroplasts in plants that have the capacity to make this harmonious arrangement whereby we breathe in oxygen and in a beautiful exchange give back carbon dioxide. And what is life organically is composed of some very, very simple ingredients, but infinitely combined. And when we come down to the interesting nucleus of a cell, it was a point where we thought that within that nucleus, this arrangement discovered in the 1950s by Francis Crick and so on and Watson, they realized, and through work also of a number of others, this wonderful structure. And now coming back to Schrödinger, he says predictably that he thinks that this nucleus of life would have to be something like a crystal, or the formation of a crystal, an atypical crystal, that is, some kind of crystal that we can observe chemically. In other words, he brings it to chemistry. And we know how crystals form. You have a crystalline solution. Maybe at school you'll have done a chemistry experiment, and some salts in solution, and as soon as you evaporate the solution, these crystals start forming in a fascinating way and join together, and it's purely molecular chemistry. So how do we get life from that? And there are some people today who think that abiogenesis, that is the beginning of organic life, has come from crystalline structures. But that doesn't sit well with our gut. It doesn't sit well with our intelligence, because we believe and we know from personal experience that life has some subtle components that are not purely crystalline matter. Thought, feelings, love, creativity, language, description, abstract symbols. All of these kinds of things cannot be reduced to mere crystals. And yet, there is such a thing as matter. There's such a thing as energy. Now, of course, this is an age-old question. The Prashna Upanishad, and all our answers have to come from the Upanishads, surely, which are not just pronunciations or pronouncements, but they're also not only well thought out, but they're also logical and follow a sequence. But they have an authority as well, which comes from experience. So we take the Upanishads. Now, the idea of finding out whether something is true or not is we take the principle, we follow the logic of it, we agree, maybe there's some experience there, we take for granted the authority of it, but then we are left to experiment for ourselves. And the first port of call, as Basil has mentioned, is, well, we're asking the question about life. We must be living entities. Then the next question is, well, what is that? And what is the explanation? Why should it be there? And then, if we really investigate properly, we come across abstract concepts. These are only concepts because we can only find examples, but our reality is purely on the psychophysical level. It's to do with tables and chairs. It's to do with all these other things, And of course, nowadays, artificial intelligence and all these kinds of things that come into our field of direct experience. But all of our experience is coming through the avenue of instrumentation. It's all coming through the avenue of the sense organs. And the sense organs, eyes, ears, and so on. And according to our Vedanta philosophy, these are simply necessary combinations of subtle forces. But we begin simply agreeing with basic modern science that two things originate. Now, the particular Upanishad I'm talking about is the Prashna Upanishad. Prashna means question. And a simple question is being asked, but we'll paraphrase a little bit. So, first question is exactly at the grossest level, because that's how we investigate. We go from gross to a little bit more subtle, a little bit more subtle. And the wonderful thing about the Upanishads is they don't tell us the ultimate straight away. They tell us gradually. They lead us by the hand, as it were. Say, come on, step by step. Let us state the obvious. Well, the obvious is I am there to ask the question, a so-called living entity, and I don't feel I'm chemistry, but no doubt some chemistry is going on. So the first question comes, and I suppose we should give you the background story. And the background story is that there are 6 questioners who come to a teacher. And these are qualified questioners. In other words, they are scientifically interested in the answers. They want to know what is the truth. You can't ask any old person. You have to ask a person who you feel is going to supply all the answers. And so the teacher happens to be a great sage called, it's the Lord of creation himself. So you can't get a higher authority than that. Well, the Pippalada is the one who's being approached, but the answers are coming from the Lord himself. Now, if it wasn't like that, we would doubt it. How can we ascertain that because this text is saying Pippalada is the sage, and yet we're jumping to, no, the Lord of creatures, the Creator himself is answering? Because unless the teacher has some kind of direct contact, as it were, with the source, the origin, how can we doubt? How can we be confident of his answers? We can simply say, well, this is abstract. You know nothing more than I know, really. And so what is your evidence for it? Now, there's an interesting passage in the Gospel of Ramakrishna where Ramakrishna is part and parcel. He overhears a conversation. And the conversation is actually Naran. And you'll recall that Naran became the great, great Swami Vivekananda. And he's declaring in his rebellious way, I can't believe in any of these scriptures. This scripture says this and that scripture says that, and they seem to be contradictory. So where does it all lie? Now Ramakrishna gives a beautiful, beautiful, simple, but profound answer. He says there are 2 ways of dealing with scripture. One way is the literal, and the other is the real. And then in case you have a head-scratching moment, what is meant by all of that? Then he says, well, here's an example. Imagine writing a letter to somebody. Is it better to read the contents of the letter and make up your own mind about I'm introducing my own kind of commentary on this, and introducing some kind of, interpretation. What does it mean when it says this? What does it mean when it says that? There could be a misunderstanding. Or is it better to be face to face and have a conversation? Well, the conversation and the letter could have the same content, but which is the more authoritative? Which is the more real? That's what he means by real. Then he says, I never make any decision or never make any findings about truth unless it comes, in his case he's saying, from the Divine Mother. And you get many people, even in modern times, who say, well, we have a scripture, how will we interpret it? 2 people, 3 people, 4 people have different understandings of the same text. Which one shall we take? And they're all saying, our authority is from the Spirit. And what do we mean by Spirit? Well, it so happens that 5 people have 5 different spirits, it seems. In other words, my interpretation is coming through, so there has to be a condition. There has to be a purity of mind whereby the truth becomes revealed. That is something from inside. It's nothing abstract. It's nothing to do with literature. It's nothing to do with reading a book. It's nothing to do with even with what I say or others say. It's coming from inside. That's what it is. And be careful that it's not your own idea, because it has to be compatible with reasoning, and it has to be compatible with other people's internal discoveries. There is an aha moment. Yes, that's it. That's the truth. Not because I heard it in a kind of, psychic way. No, I heard it actually from the one I can talk to and the one who responds, what we call God. So 5 pupils, and they're answering questions. Can we answer your question? And he says, well, yes, but you have to live with me. And if you live with me for so long, I'm going to ask you, live with me for another year, but live with me with austerity, chastity, and faith. These 3 things. In other words, these are 3 components in all of our spiritual life if we want the answers to these questions. What do we mean by austerity? Well, now we have to go to the Bhagavad Gita, 17th chapter, and find out there are 3 types of austerity. Austerity of the body, austerity of speech, austerity of the mind. But all of them say we have to be a master of the mind, not a slave. We have to be able to direct the mind as we wish. Now, one important technique in doing that is to talk to the mind as if it is a disobedient child, which inevitably it can be, and say, oh, my mind, make a choice about this or that. Or we can notice thoughts going here and there, a kind of veritable jungle or disparate thoughts going in all kinds of directions, and not being this mind, being able to observe it, therefore not being it, but being able to see it, and seeing it not as a nuisance, but as an instrument. We can say, you're of great use to me and value to me because ultimately you're going to be my teacher. You are going to enlighten me. It is the mind itself that is going to illumine the authentic self that is the essence, the substratum, the root of what I call I, and therefore everything else, whole of the universe. Now, one important concept. Whatever happens to me, whatever happens to the atom, whatever happens to the bacteria, whatever happens to the worm, every law which is there applies universally. A beautiful, beautiful series of stanzas called the Purusha Shuktam, visualizing the whole of the cosmos as a divine body, as one entity, one person. Purusha means person, one person. So when we look at what is life, we can see the laws that apply here in a pulsing, breathing entity, the laws that apply in a bacterial cell, the laws that apply at an atomic level, the laws that apply in the universe, no matter how far away. It seems to us, it's a relativity of perception. It is the same laws that are functioning, a universality of law. That's a very fundamental concept, because a shift in understanding will see this whole universe is not outside us. In fact, we are inside it in a sense, but we are part and parcel of it. We are operating under the same basic laws, and that is why these ancient sages said, if we want to understand this thing called the cosmos and life itself, we have to take one sample of it. And the sample of it would be closest to us, namely body and mind and all the history that goes with it and everything that I call I, analyze it very, very rigorously and say, anything that changes, anything that is assembled of parts cannot be me. It must be something that is changing and something that I can clearly observe and therefore direct and change. Mastery of the mind, that is it. That is what is austerity or tapasya. And then the other qualification, self-restraint is there, but also chastity, purity of mind, purity of our behavior, and purity, restraint of all the senses, and faith. What does faith mean? Faith and trust, interchangeable words. It means I have faith that the divine is presented here. And the more truth gets revealed to me, the more faith I have, because it's based on verification, my own verification. But I have to have this trust. Trust that nature knows what it's doing. Trust that there is this great Purusha. Trust that I am part of it. Trust that I can go with the flow and be carried, like a child can be carried. Trust that my machinery is working well. It is not defective. Trust that my mind is capable of stability. Trust that I can change things. Trust that I can master things. All of this comes under the label of trust. Then, after this qualification, the first question comes. Well, the question is something like that. It is basically, what is the origin of all of this? It's asking, basically, what is life? And actually, 4 out of the 6 questions are asking the same basic question. So his asked is, Venerable Sir, that is the sage, from where truly are all these creatures born? Where are they coming from? We'll observe that life begins from birth. It has a duration time, and then there's an ending. And all of life goes along the same pattern. So it's natural to ask, in connection with what is life, what is the beginning of it? What is the origin of it? Where is it all coming from? Well, the answer comes like this. Well, the Lord of all creatures, Prajapati. Well, who is the Prajapati? Who is this Lord? It's the Lord who is the ultimate authority and is saying, yes, it's all coming from me. I am the origin. I am the Alpha and the Omega. I'm the beginning and the end, and also in between. And this is represented by a kind of trinity in the Hindu tradition, which says that there is a Brahma, there's a Vishnu, and there is a Shiva. There is a creator or projector of things, a manifester. There's something that sustains everything, and there's something that dissolves it all. But where does it go into? It goes into a state of potentiality. Ultimately, this whole universe will go into that state of potentiality. In other words, we're following a basic law. If birth, life, and death happens to Swami Purnananda, then it happens to the whole cosmos. Because the Swami is just a small sample. And if you want to know if the whole of rice is cooked in a pot, you don't have to taste every grain of rice. 1 grain is enough. If 1 grain is cooked, the whole thing is cooked. And so one thing is analyzed. How does he create? How is he the Lord of all creatures? What is the secret of his origin? How is he going to do it? Well, he's desirous of manifesting. It's put in a kind of human way. Desirous of upspring. So what does he do? He performs austerity, in other words. He combines forces and makes a friction. And having performed this, he produces, having agitated, he produces two things. They're a pair. These two things are technically called Rayi and Prana. What is Rayi? Well, it can mean food, but it really means matter, material, the thing that is consumed. What consumes it? Prana. And Rayi happens to be feminine, Prana happens to be masculine. So these two are interpreted as food and its eater. So we have a kind of duality of primary existences answering maybe to matter and form that we come across in Aristotle's philosophy. And how is it applied? So matter and life, thinking that they would produce creatures for him variously, what happens? He takes a symbol. What is the symbol? Very up to date. The sun. Because as we know, without the sun, we don't have any life. So he's simply using the example, an analogy. Let's take the sun to be symbolic of life. So he says, Aditya Vai Pranaha. The sun indeed is life. And then Rayi Eva Chandramaha, matter itself is like the moon. In other words, the moon has borrowed light, and the moon is more kind of solid. And the moon also is not just matter. I can assure you it's not made from cheese. Astronauts have been there. They didn't bring cheese back. So they brought rocks back. And then this solid thing, but the sun is not like that. Now there's a kind of a debate. There's a conventional idea that the sun is made from gas or plasma, but actually, if you investigate it properly, there's a school of thought, not orthodox by any means, that says, no, it's liquid hydrogen. It has a fluctuating surface, and you can see it when you study the sun. You can see the activities, just like a kind of ocean of fire. And when you see the differences in temperatures and whatever, you can work that out, and the emission of electrons and so on. Then it has a lattice, and so therefore you can, those people expert in black body radiation, perfect radiation that is, will see the sun is almost a perfect radiator, black body radiation. So the sun, that's where the sun is. So matter is truly all of this with a wave of a hand. The typical description. There's this and that. When we say that, we're really talking of the internal principle. When we're talking of this, we're talking of matter. Now, what is this matter and what is this life? These are all in the material world, but are they standalone matter, standalone energy? Is life a standalone thing? No. Is it separate from this Prajapati? No. It must be the body, in other words, the emanation of it. And because it has a wave-like structure, you can then ask another question. Why should it be there in the first place? Now, the answer is Prajapati desired it. Well, you may ask, if you have a pedantic nature, well, why did he desire it? And the answer is in this philosophy of Lila, mentioned by one of the questioners here, mentioned by somebody here before we started recording. All right, yes. What is the advantage of viewing life in this way? It changes our whole reactive approach to life. We decide that since it is a play, since it is a changing thing, since it is not this deep Purusha, this person within us, this central entity, what is called the Atman or the Self, that is the one that is the substratum of the psychophysical, that doesn't change, that has a masterly capacity, then the rest must be something that is vacillating, and it is a kind of play of waves, and therefore if we treat it in this way, we'll have something like a sporting and adventurous attitude. In other words, all the effects that we see will be like water off a duck's back. That is, we will have approached life firstly with no desires, with no fears, and we will have approached this also with a kind of attitude that we are free from any pairs of opposites, hot and cold, pleasure and pain, flattery or cursing. Any of these come under the classification pairs of opposites. We'll be immune to that because the composition of the play will be this contrast. And we see here contrast: sun, moon, light, day, male, female, electrons, protons. It all comes in pairs. And criticism, praise, blame. All of this is a vacillating pair of opposites that comes, and it's a kind of push-pull situation that creates everything moving. A kind of built-in frustration which is necessary for the game to occur and play out. So, the sun indeed is life. Matter itself is the moon. It means represents it. Matter is truly all this. Whatever is formed and formless, it acknowledges there are some things we cannot pick up with all the five senses. Therefore, whatever is formed is itself matter. Matter and life interact and produce the whole creation. Everything gross and subtle is matter. In the cosmic process, or becoming, there's always the element of matter. So Rayi is the material medium in which all forms are expressed. Now, the analogy continues. Just as the sun rises in the morning, the rays spread initially in the east, and then as it advances, it gets bigger, it rises more throughout the day, and creates day and daylight. It now saturates all the other quarters, not just the eastern quarter, and enters into that. In that same way, this is what life does. This is prana, this is the energy, this is the force that activates, as it were, the matter which is there. Who has all forms? The golden one, the all-knowing, the goal, the soul light, the giver of heat, possessing 1,000 rays, means infinite, existing in 100 forms. Thus arises the sun, the life of all creation. And of course, we have to acknowledge that the sun in many systems of ancient times is regarded as the infinite life of all beings. And tomorrow we have a full solar eclipse, so I don't think it'd be so, in some places it'd be seen as a full solar eclipse. And so don't look at it, please. If you have some suitable, well-qualified glasses, then you can maybe witness it. But you see, the ancient days, they thought it was a disaster. A Rahu, a dragon, had come and swallowed the sun. That was the idea. Very inauspicious moment. And yet we know more. No, it's to do with the shadows going in front of the sun. That's all it is. Nothing appeared, nothing disappeared. Well, time, of course, is associated with the sun. It gives us all of that. But the whole question carries on, and we go on beyond the analogy, and we'll see what is the second question. So now we've dealt with material. That is, life as matter and energy. Is that a sufficient answer? No, because it's only on the material level. Is there something behind it that is generating? Already we know that the something behind it is what we might call a creator. But is there something more than that? Well, we have to dig deeper. So the next question would be, well, how many powers, how many forces, how many components of energy, in other words, support this created world? We know how it started. We want to know how it's kept going. So now we're covering the origin, and now we're covering how does it keep going? What is life in manifested condition? How many powers or forces illuminate this? And who among them is the greatest? Now the story that is told. It's also told in the Chandogya Upanishad. See, in the body, a number of different forces are there. Devas, that is revealing factors, eyes, ears, etc. And they all declare supremacy. But then the breath comes out, and all of them have to go up with it, and they have to declare breath actually is the superior force within the body. And prana actually indicates breath. It indicates actually etymologically the thing that moves us forward, and moves us forward in breath. Now we have to irresistibly come to the Jewish tradition that has this ruach, where the divine breathes over the waters and instills life in this way. Same kind of concept is there. The truth is universal. And so what is the answer? Well, vital breaths, yes. The chief bearing of all of this goes into all of that. That's quite clear what that is. And then another question comes. And I'm paraphrasing all these questions. So, the next question will come. How does it come into this body to start with? And how does it distribute itself and establish itself? In what way does it repart? And how does it support what is eternal? You may say, there's one question, no, there are many questions in this one question. How does it support and what relates to the self? Now we're taking this sample and saying, okay, but now in connection with me, how does it work? So you're asking questions which are highly transcendental, is the preface to the answer. Because I think you are most devoted to the source of things called Brahman, I am going to tell you. This life is born of the self. As in the case of a person, there is this shadow, so is this life connected with the self. It comes into this body by the activity of the mind. So a person's life in this body is the appropriate result of his activities in a previous existence. We're getting closer to this truth, but not all the way there. And as the shadow of former lives, a new life arises. We have a history because of a causal law. We can't come in, what we call tabula rasam, that is with a blank sheet. No, we come in with some experiences, and those experiences carry on the story. And so as a sovereign demands his officers, saying, you superintend such and such villages, even so does this life allot the other vital breaths in their respective places. And then it goes on to the out-breath and the in-breath. In other words, the 5 pranas that constitute part of what we call a subtle body. Now we can clarify all this with reference to Taittiriya Upanishad that talks about koshas. So we have an outside thing, the body, made from matter and life energy. Then we have the inside, which is made from purely life energy, prana, pranic body, what some people are calling the morphic resonance. But then within that is a mind, and within that is an intellect. So we go on, and is all connected with life because one provides the life to the other, and so it goes on until we find a source. And so, what is the next one? The next one is a question 4. What happens when a person sleeps? Now we're talking about 3 states of consciousness. And so dreamless sleep and so on is mentioned. And then we come to the statement, he who knows the shadowless, bodiless, colorless, pure, undecaying self attains the supreme. Undecaying self. He who, oh dear, knows thus becomes omniscient, becomes all. And then he quotes a verse. He who knows that undecaying self in which are established the self of the nature of intelligence, the vital breaths of the elements, with all the revealing factors, the deities or their powers, becomes omniscient and enters everything. Not only is it a life within the body, but is a life in all bodies everywhere. And then another question comes about Om. What is its significance? In other words, how do we access this? And then to what is this Purusha made from all these different parts? And now we have a cosmic vision about everything. Now we have life from a material point of view, a gross point of view, from an energetic point of view, now from a mental point of view, consciousness point of view, 3 states of consciousness. And ultimately, as a self internally, whose presence acts or activates, not directly as an agent, but who is part and parcel of it with no differentiation. In other words, a cosmic person playing and dancing as this universe. Therefore, if we were to ask in a different way or answer in a different way, what is life? We might just say life is the dancing expression of the divine and is the ultimate source and is existence itself. In other words, it's life as existence and as consciousness as in bliss. That is what it is. When we see the manifested portion, we only take the external skin of it and we start investigating cellular activity. For example, the nucleus of a cell, what is called the genome, was the DNA. Thought that we would examine what is the chemical, physical, what is the molecular makeup of all of this, and the sophistication of it will explain the advancement of the human, as opposed to, let's say, a banana, or let's say any other form of life, or a fern, or a rice grain. And yet, you see, the answer wasn't there. And then it was thought, well, this nucleus of a cell is life itself because it is somehow the architect and the unchanging manufacturer of protein. That's correct. But it's a one-way street. But then where does the protein come from that makes this DNA, the strands of it? The chemical bonding is chemical. The simple formula of 4 letters bonded together and their arrangement is responsible for the behavior, no doubt. But where does the programming come from? The programming comes from a free-willing, changeable entity, which is the entirety of the cell, and we don't know, or people don't know, how it works. We know that it is life. It is life, it is matter, it is energy working on matter. Where does it come from? Ultimately, it comes from, through a series of manifestations, the divine itself. And that divine is within you, and it is your own immortal self. This is the thrust of the Upanishads. This is why we pursue it. How do we do it? We do it, in this case, Prashna Upanishad answers, we take this sound symbol Om, we take devotion, we take austerity, we take faith, we take self-control, and we work with that to make a revealing entity. The mind itself then becomes the illuminator. Well, I guess we can leave it at that. To all you living beings. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Enjoy your life.
Om